The brass nameplate hit the concrete floor with a metallic clang that echoed through the silent courtroom. Petty Officer Third Class Audrey Smith, the tribunal officer announced, his voice cutting through the tension like a blade. You are hereby stripped of rank and reassigned to general maintenance duties, effective immediately. But as Audrey bent to retrieve her fallen nameplate, Admiral Rebecca Hayes leaned forward in her chair, squinting at something on Audrey's uniform that made her blood run cold. What she saw there would change everything. A small, nearly invisible mark that only 3 people in the entire Navy were authorized to recognize. The same mark that belonged to a unit that officially didn't exist. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. The fluorescent lights in courtroom B buzzed with the same mechanical persistence that had defined Audrey Smith's last 6 months at Naval Station Norfolk. She stood at attention before the 3-officer tribunal, her dress blues crisp despite the circumstances, her short auburn hair regulation perfect beneath her combination cover. At 29, she carried herself with the quiet dignity of someone who had learned that survival often depended on invisibility. The charges are serious, Petty Officer Smith, Captain James Rodriguez began, reading from the file spread before him. Insubordination, violation of direct orders, and unauthorized access to classified communication systems during the operation in the Persian Gulf. Audrey's brown eyes remained fixed on a point somewhere above the tribunal's heads. She had memorized every detail of this moment during the sleepless nights leading up to her court-martial. The way Commander Patricia Williams sat slightly forward, her expression unreadable. The manner in which Admiral Hayes observed from the back row, technically present only as an observer, but somehow commanding the room's attention. Do you have anything to say in your defense? Captain Rodriguez continued. No, sir, Audrey replied, her voice steady despite the storm raging inside her chest. She could have told them about the real reason she had accessed those communication systems. She could have explained why she had disobeyed Lieutenant Commander Michael Thompson's direct orders during that night operation 6 months ago. But the truth was buried under so many layers of classification that, speaking it aloud would have resulted in far worse consequences than a simple reduction in rank. Very well, Rodriguez exchanged glances with his fellow officers. After careful deliberation, this tribunal finds Petty Officer Second Class Audrey Smith guilty on all charges. You are hereby reduced in rank to Petty Officer Third Class and reassigned to general maintenance duties. Your security clearance is revoked, and you are prohibited from accessing any classified materials or restricted areas aboard this installation. The gavel came down with finality, and that's when Audrey's nameplate, the small brass rectangle that had identified her as a Petty Officer Second Class for the past 3 years, slipped from her trembling fingers and clattered to the floor. As she bent to retrieve it, Admiral Hayes rose from her observer's chair and approached the front of the courtroom. The 60-year-old flag officer moved with the measured grace of someone who had spent 4 decades earning every star on her collar. Her silver hair was pulled back in a regulation bun, and her steel-gray eyes missed nothing. Captain Rodriguez, Admiral Hayes said, her voice carrying the authority that came with commanding the Atlantic Fleet. I'd like a moment to review the defendant's service record. Rodriguez looked surprised but nodded. Of course, Admiral. Hayes approached Audrey, who had straightened back to attention, nameplate clutched in her hand. For a moment that seemed to stretch into eternity, the Admiral studied her face with the intensity of someone trying to solve a complex puzzle. Where did you serve before Norfolk, Petty Officer Smith? Hayes asked quietly. USS Leviathan, ma'am, communications specialist. And before that? Audrey hesitated for just a fraction of a second, long enough for Hayes to notice. Various assignments, ma'am, mostly classified. Admiral Hayes nodded slowly, her gaze dropping to inspect Audrey's uniform with the practiced eye of someone who had seen thousands of sailors over the decades. The ribbons were standard for someone with Audrey's apparent service record: Good Conduct Medal, Navy Achievement Medal, Global War on Terrorism Service Medal. Nothing unusual or particularly noteworthy. But then Hayes saw it. Just above the left breast pocket, barely visible unless you knew exactly what to look for, was a small, embroidered mark. It appeared to be nothing more than a manufacturing defect, a tiny imperfection in the fabric that most people would dismiss without a second thought. But Admiral Hayes knew better. She had seen that mark only twice before in her entire career, and both times it had belonged to sailors who officially didn't exist. The Ghost Unit mark. Hayes felt her pulse quicken as she studied the small symbol more closely. It was perfectly executed, exactly as it should be according to specifications that existed in only one classified document in the entire Department of Defense. The mark was subtle enough to pass casual inspection, but distinctive enough to be recognized by those with the proper clearance. But that was impossible. The Ghost Unit had been disbanded 8 years ago, its members reassigned to deep cover positions throughout the fleet. Only 3 people in the Navy were supposed to know how to identify former Ghost Unit personnel, and Hayes was one of them. "Petty Officer Smith," Hayes said carefully, "I notice your uniform is in excellent condition. Where did you have it tailored?" Audrey's eyes flickered with something that might have been recognition. "Norfolk Naval Base Tailoring Shop, ma'am. Standard issue." "I see." Hayes stepped back, her mind racing through the implications. If Audrey Smith was former Ghost Unit, then everything about this court-martial was wrong. Ghost Unit personnel operated under different rules, different protocols, different chains of command. They were authorized to disobey orders when operational security was at stake. They had access to communication systems that didn't officially exist. More importantly, they were never supposed to be subjected to standard military justice proceedings. "Captain Rodriguez," Hayes said, turning back to the tribunal, "I'm invoking my authority as fleet commander to request a private review of this case." Rodriguez looked confused. "Admiral, the tribunal has already rendered its verdict. Nevertheless, I have concerns about certain aspects of this proceeding that require immediate investigation." Hayes's tone brooked no argument. "I'm ordering a 48-hour stay of execution on the sentence pending my review." "Ma'am, with respect," Commander Williams interjected, "what possible concerns could warrant overturning a unanimous verdict?" Hayes looked back at Audrey, who remained standing at attention but whose eyes now held a glimmer of something that hadn't been there before. Hope, perhaps. Or maybe recognition that her carefully constructed cover was beginning to unravel. "That's classified, Commander," Hayes replied simply. "Petty Officer Smith, you're to remain on base pending my investigation. Report to my office tomorrow at 0800 hours. "Yes, ma'am," Audrey said, her voice betraying nothing. As the courtroom began to empty, Hayes lingered, watching Audrey gather her belongings with the mechanical precision of someone who had learned to compartmentalize emotions. The young woman's movements were economical, practiced, and somehow familiar in a way that made Hayes's instincts twinge with recognition. Captain Rodriguez approached the Admiral as Audrey left the courtroom. "Ma'am, if I may ask, what exactly did you see that concerns you?" Hayes considered her response carefully. Rodriguez was a good officer, but he didn't have the clearance level necessary to understand what she had discovered. "Sometimes, Captain, the most dangerous secrets hide in plain sight. And sometimes, the people we think we know best are the ones we don't know at all." "I don't understand, Admiral." "You don't need to understand, you just need to trust that this case is more complicated than it appears." Hayes gathered her own papers and prepared to leave. "Have the transcripts of this proceeding delivered to my office immediately. And Captain, this conversation never happened." Rodriguez nodded, though his expression remained puzzled. "Yes, ma'am." As Admiral Hayes walked out of the courtroom, her mind was already working through the implications of what she had discovered. If Audrey Smith was indeed former Ghost Unit, then her presence at Norfolk was no accident. Ghost Unit personnel were embedded throughout the fleet for specific reasons, usually involving long-term intelligence gathering or counterintelligence operations. Which meant that whatever had happened 6 months ago in the Persian Gulf, whatever had led to Audrey's court-martial, was likely connected to something much larger and more dangerous than a simple case of insubordination. Hayes had 48 hours to uncover the truth. And if she was right about that mark on Audrey's uniform, those 48 hours might determine whether they prevented a catastrophe or walked blindly into one. The fluorescent lights continued to buzz overhead as the empty courtroom settled into silence, but the real drama was just beginning. Somewhere in the classified archives of the Pentagon, a file was about to be opened that hadn't been touched in 8 years. A file that would explain exactly why Petty Officer 3rd Class Audrey Smith was far more dangerous than anyone at Norfolk Naval Station could possibly imagine. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. The maintenance bay beneath Pier 7 smelled of diesel fuel, salt water, and the particular brand of industrial cleaner that the Navy used to scrub away 8 decades of accumulated grime. Audrey Smith pulled on her work coveralls at 0430 hours, 2 hours before her official shift began, because she had learned that solitude was easier to find in the pre-dawn darkness when most of the base was still asleep. Her new assignment was simple enough: general maintenance on the fleet of support vessels that kept Norfolk Naval Station operational. Tugboats, fuel barges, garbage scows, and the occasional decommissioned destroyer waiting for its final voyage to the scrapyard. It was honest work, and after 6 months of legal proceedings, Audrey found a strange comfort in the mechanical predictability of hydraulic systems and diesel engines. "Morning, sunshine," called Chief Petty Officer Marcus Washington as he entered the bay, coffee mug in hand and a maintenance roster tucked under his arm. At 52, Washington had been fixing Navy equipment since before Audrey was born, and his weathered hands bore the scars of 30 years spent coaxing life out of aging machinery. "You're early again." "Couldn't sleep, Chief," Audrey replied, not looking up from the fuel pump she was rebuilding. "Figured I might as well make myself useful." Washington studied her with the practiced eye of someone who had supervised hundreds of young sailors over the decades. Something about Smith bothered him, though he couldn't quite put his finger on what it was. She worked with the methodical precision of someone who understood complex systems, but her personnel file indicated only basic mechanical training. She approached every task with the quiet efficiency of a seasoned professional, yet she was supposedly fresh from a communications specialty. "Smith," Washington said, settling onto a workbench nearby, "mind if I ask you something?" "Go ahead, Chief." "What exactly did you do before you ended up in my maintenance bay?" Audrey's hands paused for just a moment before continuing their work on the fuel pump. "Communications specialist, Chief. Radio operations, mostly." "Uh-huh." Washington sipped his coffee thoughtfully. "And before that?" "Various assignments." "Various assignments." Washington repeated the phrase slowly, tasting the deliberate vagueness of it. "You know, Smith, I've been in this Navy for 3 decades. I've worked with communications specialists before. Hell, I've dated a few of them, but I've never met one who could rebuild a diesel fuel injection system like she'd been doing it her whole life." Audrey looked up from her work, meeting Washington's gaze with steady brown eyes. "I've always been good with my hands, Chief." "I'm sure you have." Washington stood up and walked over to inspect her work on the fuel pump. The disassembly was perfect. Every component laid out in precise order, every seal and gasket carefully catalogued. It was the kind of methodical approach that came from years of working on equipment where a single mistake could mean the difference between life and death. "Tell me, Smith, you ever work on anything bigger than a radio?" "Depends on your definition of bigger, Chief." Washington almost smiled at that. Smith had a way of answering questions without actually answering them, a skill that usually indicated either extensive intelligence training or a guilty conscience. In her case, he was beginning to suspect it might be both. The morning proceeded with its usual routine. Audrey worked through a series of maintenance tasks with quiet efficiency, while Washington supervised the small crew of mechanics and electricians assigned to keep the support fleet operational. But as the day progressed, he found himself watching Smith more closely, noting details that most supervisors would have missed. She instinctively knew the layout of complex electrical systems without consulting technical manuals. When Petty Officer Second Class David Parker struggled with a hydraulic problem on one of the tugboats, Smith provided guidance that went far beyond basic mechanical knowledge. Most tellingly, she moved around the maintenance bay with the unconscious awareness of someone who had spent serious time in confined spaces where spatial orientation could mean survival. "Parker," Washington called out around mid-morning, "take Smith with you to check the anchor windlass on the harbor tug. That system's been acting up, and I want a second opinion on whether we need to order replacement parts." The harbor tug Steadfast was a sturdy vessel designed for moving larger ships in and out of port. Its anchor windlass was a complex mechanical system that required both technical knowledge and physical strength to maintain properly. As Parker and Audrey climbed aboard, Washington watched from the pier, curious to see how Smith would handle a system she supposedly had never encountered before. 20 minutes later, Parker's voice crackled over the radio with a mixture of confusion and admiration. "Chief, Smith found the problem. The windlass motor bearings are shot, but she also identified stress fractures in the mounting brackets that would have caused catastrophic failure if we'd tried to operate under load." Washington frowned. Stress fracture analysis wasn't something they taught in basic mechanics school. It was the kind of advanced diagnostic skill that came from experience with critical systems, the kind of systems found on warships, not tugboats. "Smith," Washington said when they returned to the maintenance bay, "how exactly did you identify those stress fractures?" "Experience, Chief." Audrey began cleaning her tools with the same methodical precision she brought to everything else. "Metal fatigue has a particular look to it once you know what to watch for." "Where exactly did you get experience with stress fracture analysis?" "Various assignments." There it was again, that careful non-answer that revealed nothing while acknowledging everything. Washington was beginning to realize that Audrey Smith's personnel file probably contained more redacted sections than actual information. The rest of the shift passed without incident, but Washington couldn't shake the feeling that he was supervising someone whose qualifications far exceeded her apparent rank and assignment. Smith worked with the quiet confidence of someone who had been responsible for much more sophisticated equipment than the aging support vessels at Norfolk. As the afternoon wore on, Washington made a decision that would have surprised his subordinates. He decided to test Smith's knowledge in a way that would either confirm his suspicions or put them to rest permanently. "Smith," he called out as the workday neared its end, "I've got a special project for you tomorrow." "Yes, Chief?" "The USS Franklin is coming in for routine maintenance next week." Washington watched Smith's reaction carefully. The Franklin was a guided missile destroyer with some of the most sophisticated electronic warfare systems in the Navy. "I want you to assist with the preliminary diagnostics on her defensive systems." For just a moment, something flickered in Smith's expression, a recognition quickly suppressed but unmistakable to someone who knew what to look for. "Chief, I don't think my clearance level is sufficient for that kind of work." "Your clearance was suspended, not revoked," Washington replied. "And besides, you'll be working under direct supervision, unless, of course, you don't feel qualified to handle advanced electronic systems." Smith studied his face, clearly recognizing the challenge implicit in his words. "I can handle whatever assignment you give me, Chief." "Good. Report to Pier 12 at 0600 tomorrow." "And Smith?" "Yes, Chief?" "Bring your technical manuals. The Franklin systems are more complex than anything you've worked on before." As Smith gathered her gear and prepared to leave for the day, Washington pulled out his cell phone and scrolled through his contacts until he found the number he was looking for. Master Chief Petty Officer Jennifer Torres had been his mentor 15 years ago, and she now worked in personnel security at the Pentagon. If anyone could shed light on Audrey Smith's background, it would be Torres. The phone rang 3 times before Torres answered. "Washington, you old dog. What do you want?" "Jenny, I need a favor. I've got a sailor working for me who doesn't add up. Personnel file says communications specialist, but she's got knowledge and skills that don't match her supposed training." "Name?" "Audrey Smith. Just transferred to my section after a court-martial." The line went silent for several seconds. When Torres spoke again, her voice had changed completely. "Marcus, where exactly are you calling from?" "My office at Norfolk. Why?" "Hang up the phone, right now. Don't discuss this sailor with anyone else. Don't put anything in writing, and don't ask any more questions about her background." "Jenny, what the hell?" "Marcus, I'm serious. Some personnel files are marked in ways that trigger automatic security reviews. If Smith is who I think she might be, your inquiry just set off alarms at the highest levels of naval intelligence." Washington felt a chill run down his spine. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying that sailor you're supervising might be a lot more dangerous than you realize. And if I'm right, you're about to have visitors who will make your conversation with me look like a casual chat about the weather." The line went dead, leaving Washington staring at his phone with the growing realization that Audrey Smith wasn't just hiding her qualifications, she was hiding her entire identity. Outside, Smith walked across the base toward her quarters, unaware that her carefully constructed cover was beginning to unravel. But as she passed beneath a security camera near the enlisted housing complex, someone in a windowless building 3,000 miles away was already preparing to board a flight to Norfolk. Some secrets were too important to stay buried, and Audrey Smith was about to learn that 8 years of hiding had only delayed the inevitable. The maintenance bay fell silent as Washington locked up for the night, but his mind was racing with questions that he was suddenly afraid to ask. Tomorrow would bring the USS Franklin, and a test that might reveal more about Petty Officer Smith than either of them was prepared to handle. But tonight, Washington had a phone call to make to his commanding officer, a conversation that would change everything for everyone involved. The USS Franklin arrived at Pier 12 precisely at 0530 hours, her gray hull cutting through the morning mist like a blade through silk. Audrey stood on the pier, watching the guided missile destroyer maneuver into position, her trained eye automatically cataloging details that most observers would miss. The ship's defensive radar arrays were configured in an unusual pattern, suggesting recent modifications to her electronic warfare capabilities. Her hull bore the subtle scorch marks that indicated she'd seen recent action, though nothing in the official reports mentioned combat operations. "Impressive sight, isn't she?" Chief Washington's voice startled Audrey from her observations. He'd approached silently, moving with the practiced stealth of someone who had learned to read people by watching them when they thought they were unobserved. "Yes, Chief. She's a beautiful ship. Arleigh Burke-class destroyer. Aegis Combat System, SPY-1D radar. Vertical launch system, capable of handling everything from surface-to-air missiles to Tomahawk cruise missiles." Washington studied Audrey's face as he recited the ship's capabilities. "Course, I'm sure you already knew all that from the technical specifications." Audrey kept her expression neutral. "I've read the basic information, Chief." "Basic information," Washington almost smiled. "Right. Well, let's see how you handle the advanced stuff." They boarded the Franklin through the ship's main gangway, where they were met by Lieutenant Commander Sarah Mitchell, the ship's executive officer. Mitchell was a compact woman in her early 30s, with the kind of focused intensity that came from managing complex operations under pressure. "Chief Washington," Mitchell said, extending her hand, "welcome aboard. I understand you're here to assist with our defensive systems diagnostics." "Yes, ma'am. This is Petty Officer Smith. She'll be assisting with the technical evaluation." Mitchell's eyes lingered on Audrey for a moment longer than strictly necessary. "Smith, have we met before?" "No, ma'am," Audrey replied quickly. "This is my first time aboard the Franklin." Mitchell's expression suggested she wasn't entirely convinced, but she led them through the ship's passageways toward the Combat Information Center. "We've been experiencing intermittent failures in our electronic countermeasures system. The failures are random, brief, and don't show up on standard diagnostics." As they walked through the ship's interior, Audrey found herself automatically noting details that had nothing to do with her supposed assignment. The slight vibration in the deck plates suggested the port turbine was running at suboptimal efficiency. The crew members they passed moved with the heightened alertness of sailors who had recently been in harm's way. Most telling, the ship's weapons systems were maintained at a higher state of readiness than would be normal for a routine port visit. The Combat Information Center was the ship's nerve center, a darkened space filled with banks of monitors, radar displays, and communication equipment. It was here that the ship's officers coordinated defensive operations, tracked threats, and managed the complex dance of modern naval warfare. "Here's the problem," Mitchell said, leading them to a bank of electronic warfare consoles. "Our jamming systems work perfectly during scheduled tests, but we've had 3 instances in the past month where they failed to activate during actual operations." Washington turned to Audrey. "Smith, you're up. What's your assessment?" Audrey approached the electronic warfare console with the careful attention of someone who understood that a single mistake in diagnosis could compromise the ship's ability to defend itself. The system was far more sophisticated than anything she was supposed to have encountered in her official capacity, but she couldn't help recognizing the architecture from her previous experience with similar equipment. "Chief," she said carefully, "this system is above my clearance level." "You're working under my supervision," Washington replied. "Besides, I'm not asking you to access classified information. I just want your technical opinion on why a system might pass diagnostics but fail under operational conditions." Audrey began her examination systematically, checking power connections, signal pathways, and interface protocols. The electronic warfare system was a marvel of engineering, capable of detecting and jamming enemy radar and communications across multiple frequency bands simultaneously. But as she worked, she began to notice subtle anomalies that suggested something more complex than simple mechanical failure. "Lieutenant Commander," she said after 20 minutes of careful analysis, "when did these failures occur? What were the operational circumstances?" Mitchell consulted her tablet. "First failure was during a training exercise 3 weeks ago. Second was during a port transit in heavy weather. Third was 2 nights ago during a routine patrol. Different operational environments, different times of day, different crew rotations, Audrey mused, half to herself. But the failures were consistent in duration and effect. Exactly. Each lasted approximately 90 seconds, and in each case, the system showed no indication of malfunction before or after the failure. Audrey felt a familiar chill of recognition. She had encountered this exact failure pattern once before, under circumstances that were buried so deep in classified files that officially the incident had never happened. But she couldn't reveal that knowledge without exposing her own background. "Chief," she said carefully, "I'd like to examine the system's software logs, specifically the timing of automated diagnostic routines." Washington raised an eyebrow. "Software analysis isn't exactly basic maintenance, Smith." "No, Chief, but intermittent failures like this are often caused by timing conflicts between different system processes. If I can correlate the failure times with scheduled diagnostic routines, we might identify a pattern." Mitchell looked intrigued. "That's actually a sophisticated troubleshooting approach. Where did you learn software diagnostics?" "Various training programs, ma'am," Audrey replied, falling back on her standard non-answer. For the next hour, Audrey worked through the electronic warfare system's software architecture with the methodical precision of someone who understood not just how the system worked, but how it was designed to fail. What she discovered confirmed her worst suspicions. The failures weren't random mechanical problems. They were deliberately programmed vulnerabilities, designed to activate under specific operational conditions. Someone had sabotaged the Franklin's defensive systems. "Chief," she said quietly, "I need to speak with you privately." Washington recognized the tone in her voice and immediately led her to an empty compartment adjacent to the Combat Information Center. "What did you find, Smith?" "Chief, this isn't a mechanical failure. Someone has installed malicious code in the electronic warfare system. The failures are triggered by specific combinations of operational parameters, the kind of parameters that would occur during actual combat operations." Washington felt his blood run cold. "Are you telling me someone sabotaged this ship's defensive systems?" "Yes, Chief. And whoever did it has intimate knowledge of both the system architecture and the ship's operational procedures. This isn't the work of some disgruntled sailor with basic computer skills. This is sophisticated cyber warfare." "Smith, are you absolutely certain about this?" Audrey met his gaze with steady eyes. "Chief, I've seen this exact type of attack before. The code signature, the timing mechanisms, the triggering conditions, they're all consistent with advanced electronic warfare techniques used by hostile intelligence services." Washington stared at her for a long moment, pieces of a complex puzzle finally beginning to fall into place. "Smith, exactly where have you seen this type of attack before?" Before Audrey could answer, Lieutenant Commander Mitchell's voice echoed through the ship's communication system. "Chief Washington, please report to the Combat Information Center immediately. We have visitors." They returned to find Mitchell standing with 2 individuals in civilian clothes who somehow managed to make business suits look like uniforms. The man was tall and lean with the kind of pale complexion that suggested he spent most of his time in windowless rooms. The woman was shorter, with sharp features and eyes that missed nothing. "Chief Washington," Mitchell said, her voice carefully neutral, "these are Agents Coleman and Hart from Naval Criminal Investigative Service. They need to speak with Petty Officer Smith." Agent Coleman stepped forward, his credentials already in hand. "Petty Officer Smith, we need you to come with us for questioning regarding your analysis of this ship's systems." "On what authority?" Washington demanded. Agent Hart smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. "On the authority of national security, Chief. Petty Officer Smith has just identified what appears to be a serious breach of classified systems. We need to determine exactly how she was able to recognize attack patterns that are known to only a handful of intelligence specialists." Audrey felt the walls closing in around her. Her careful analysis had revealed too much, demonstrated knowledge that she wasn't supposed to possess. In trying to protect the ship, she had exposed herself. "Chief," she said quietly, "it's all right. I'll go with them." "Like hell you will," Washington growled. "Smith is under my supervision, and she just potentially saved this ship from a catastrophic system failure during combat operations. Instead of arresting her, you should be thanking her." Agent Coleman's expression didn't change, Chief, what Petty Officer Smith just demonstrated is the ability to identify and analyze cyber warfare techniques that are classified at the highest levels of government. The question we need to answer is how someone with her official background came to possess that knowledge. As they prepared to escort Audrey from the ship, she caught sight of Admiral Hayes approaching the gangway with several officers in tow. The Admiral's expression was grim, and she moved with the purposeful urgency of someone responding to a crisis. "It seems like this day is about to get much more complicated," Audrey murmured to herself. Agent Hart overheard and smiled coldly. "Petty Officer Smith, complicated doesn't begin to describe what's about to happen to you." But as Admiral Hayes boarded the Franklin, her first words to Lieutenant Commander Mitchell carried across the deck with unmistakable authority. "Where is Petty Officer Smith? I need to speak with her immediately." The pieces of a puzzle that had been 8 years in the making were finally beginning to come together, and Audrey realized that her time of hiding in the shadows was definitively over. The question now was whether the truth would set her free or destroy everything she had spent nearly a decade trying to protect. Admiral Rebecca Hayes stepped onto the deck of the USS Franklin with the measured authority of someone who had commanded naval operations across 3 decades and 2 oceans. Her steel-gray eyes swept the scene before her: NCIS agents flanking a maintenance worker, a confused ship's crew, and the unmistakable tension that accompanied classified operations gone sideways. "Agent Coleman," she said, her voice cutting through the morning air like a ship's horn, "release Petty Officer Smith immediately." Agent Coleman turned, his credentials still in hand but his confidence visibly shaken by the Admiral's unexpected intervention. "Ma'am, with respect, this is an active NCIS investigation. We have authority to question personnel who demonstrate unauthorized knowledge of classified systems." "And I have authority over every naval operation in this theater," Hayes replied coolly, "which supersedes your investigation until I determine otherwise." Agent Hart stepped forward, her sharp features tightening with frustration. "Admiral, Petty Officer Smith has just demonstrated detailed knowledge of cyber warfare techniques that are classified above her clearance level. That knowledge poses a significant security risk." Hayes studied Hart with the kind of measured gaze that had intimidated junior officers for decades. "Agent Hart, what exactly did Petty Officer Smith tell you about her analysis?" "She identified sophisticated malicious code embedded in the ship's electronic warfare systems," Coleman interjected. "Code that matches known attack patterns used by hostile intelligence services. The question is how someone with her background was able to recognize those patterns." "An excellent question," Hayes agreed, "one that I intend to answer personally." She turned to Lieutenant Commander Mitchell. "XO, I need your Combat Information Center cleared of all personnel except essential watchstanders. This conversation is now classified." Mitchell's expression showed she understood the gravity of the situation. "Aye, Admiral." "Combat Information Center. All personnel not on essential watch. Clear the space immediately." As the CIC emptied, Hayes approached Audrey with the same careful attention she had shown during the court-martial. But this time, her expression held something different, not curiosity, but recognition. "Petty Officer Smith," she said quietly, "yesterday in that courtroom, I saw something on your uniform that raised questions. Today, your analysis of this ship's systems has answered some of those questions while raising many others." Audrey remained at attention, but her eyes met the Admiral's with steady resolve. "Ma'am, I analyzed the systems to the best of my ability based on the technical evidence." "The technical evidence?" Hayes repeated slowly. "Tell me, Smith, in your previous assignments, did you ever encounter similar cyber warfare techniques?" The question hung in the air like smoke from a fired weapon. Audrey realized she had reached the point where careful non-answers would no longer suffice. The Admiral was offering her a choice: continue the charade and face NCIS interrogation, or reveal enough truth to explain her capabilities. "Ma'am, some of my previous assignments involved security-sensitive operations." "Security-sensitive operations?" Hayes nodded slowly. "Agent Coleman, Agent Hart, I'm invoking my authority to classify this investigation. You are to submit your preliminary reports to my office and suspend all questioning pending my review." Coleman's face flushed with anger. "Admiral, you can't simply classify an ongoing investigation because it's inconvenient." "I can classify anything that poses a risk to operational security," Hayes replied with icy calm. And I'm beginning to suspect that this investigation poses exactly that kind of risk. Agent Hart pulled out her phone. We'll need to verify your authority with our supervisors. By all means, make your calls, Hayes said. But while you're waiting for authorization, I suggest you consider the possibility that Petty Officer Smith's knowledge isn't a security breach. It's a security asset that you're about to compromise through ignorance. As the NCIS agents stepped aside to make their phone calls, Hayes gestured for Audrey to follow her to a corner of the CIC where they could speak privately. "Smith," she said in a voice barely above a whisper, "I'm going to ask you a direct question, and I need a direct answer. Are you former Ghost Unit?" The question hit Audrey like a physical blow. For 8 years, she had lived with the assumption that her previous identity was buried so deeply that it would never surface. The Ghost Unit had been disbanded, its members scattered across the fleet with new identities and fabricated service records. "Ma'am, I'm not familiar with that designation." Hayes stepped closer, her voice dropping even lower. "Smith, yesterday I noticed a mark on your uniform that only 3 people in the entire Navy are authorized to recognize. That mark identifies former Ghost Unit personnel. If you are who I think you are, then your court-martial was a massive failure of the system designed to protect you." Audrey felt 8 years of careful deception beginning to crumble. "Ma'am, I can't discuss classified operations." "You don't need to discuss operations," Hayes replied. "You just need to confirm your identity so I can determine how to proceed. Because if you're former Ghost Unit, then everything about this situation changes." Before Audrey could respond, Agent Hart approached them with her phone in hand. "Admiral, my supervisor wants to speak with you directly." Hayes took the phone without hesitation. "This is Admiral Hayes." The conversation was brief, conducted in the kind of military shorthand that conveyed maximum information with minimum words. Hayes's expression grew increasingly grim as she listened. "Understood," she said finally, handing the phone back to Hart. "Agents, you're to return to Norfolk immediately and await further instructions. This investigation is now under naval jurisdiction." Coleman looked stunned. "Ma'am, that's highly irregular." "Irregular situations require irregular responses," Hayes replied. "Your investigation just triggered security protocols that are above your clearance level. Consider yourselves fortunate that you're walking away with your careers intact." As the NCIS agents reluctantly departed, Chief Washington approached Admiral Hayes with the confused expression of someone trying to process events beyond his understanding. "Admiral," he said carefully, "I may have inadvertently caused this situation. When I noticed inconsistencies in Smith's background, I made inquiries that apparently triggered security reviews." Hayes studied Washington's weathered face, recognizing the kind of career non-commissioned officer who formed the backbone of the Navy. "Chief, your instincts were correct. There were inconsistencies in Petty Officer Smith's background. The question is whether those inconsistencies represent a security threat or a security failure." She turned back to Audrey. "Smith, I'm going to make this simple. You have 2 choices. Continue to maintain your cover and accept reassignment to a non-sensitive position pending investigation, or provide me with enough information to verify your actual background and clearance level." Audrey looked around the Combat Information Center, taking in the sophisticated equipment that surrounded them. The electronic warfare systems she had just analyzed were designed to protect this ship and its crew from threats that most civilians couldn't imagine. The cyber attack she had identified could have resulted in the deaths of everyone aboard during a combat operation. "Ma'am," she said finally, "if I provide that information, what happens to my current assignment and status?" "That depends on what you tell me and whether I can verify it through appropriate channels," Hayes replied. "But I can guarantee that if you continue to hide behind a fabricated identity while possessing knowledge that could save lives, you're not serving anyone's interests, including your own." Lieutenant Commander Mitchell, who had been observing from a respectful distance, stepped forward. "Admiral, if I may, Petty Officer Smith's analysis potentially saved this ship from catastrophic system failure during combat operations. Her knowledge, regardless of its source, has proven invaluable." Hayes nodded. "Agreed, which is why I need to understand exactly what we're dealing with." She fixed Audrey with a penetrating stare. "Smith, I'm going to ask you one more time. Are you former Ghost Unit?" Audrey felt the weight of 8 years of hiding, 8 years of suppressing her true capabilities, 8 years of living a lie designed to protect both herself and the operation she had been part of. But she also felt the weight of responsibility to the crew of the Franklin, to the other ships in the fleet that might be similarly compromised, and to the mission that had defined her entire adult life. "Ma'am," she said quietly, "I need to make a secure communication to verify my authorization to discuss classified matters." Hayes smiled for the first time since boarding the ship. "Chief Washington, escort Petty Officer Smith to the ship's secure communication center. And, Chief, whatever you hear in that compartment is classified above your clearance level." "Understood, Admiral." As they prepared to leave the CIC, Hayes called out once more. "Smith, one more thing. Whatever your real identity is, whatever your actual qualifications are, I want you to know that your actions today demonstrated the kind of professional competence and moral courage that the Navy needs. Don't let 8 years of hiding make you forget who you really are." Audrey paused at the hatch, meeting the Admiral's gaze one final time. "Ma'am, some identities are worth hiding to protect something larger than yourself. And some identities are too valuable to waste on maintenance duties," Hayes replied. "Make your call, Smith. It's time for the truth." As Audrey disappeared into the ship's interior, Admiral Hayes turned to study the electronic warfare systems that had started this entire chain of events. Somewhere in the complex web of circuits and software, an enemy had planted the seeds of destruction designed to activate at the worst possible moment. But they had underestimated one crucial factor: the possibility that someone with the knowledge to recognize their attack would be hidden in plain sight, disguised as an ordinary maintenance worker with an extraordinary past. The game was about to change, and Admiral Hayes had a feeling that Petty Officer Smith, whoever she really was, held the key to everything. The secure communications center aboard the USS Franklin was a cramped compartment lined with encryption equipment and communication gear that most sailors would never be authorized to use. Chief Washington stood guard outside while Audrey sat before a secured terminal, her fingers hovering over the keypad as she prepared to make a call that would end 8 years of carefully constructed anonymity. The number she dialed existed in only one location, a classified directory maintained by the Office of Naval Intelligence. It rang twice before a familiar voice answered. "Secure line 77 Alpha. Identify yourself." "This is Operative Shadow 7 requesting immediate verification protocol," Audrey said, using a call sign she hadn't spoken aloud in nearly a decade. The silence that followed stretched for nearly 15 seconds before the voice returned, now sharp with recognition and concern. "Shadow 7, this is Control. You are not authorized for communication on this frequency. Your operational status was terminated 8 years ago. Control, I'm invoking Article 12 of the Ghost Protocol. I have discovered evidence of hostile cyber warfare operations against fleet assets and require immediate authorization to breach cover." Another pause, shorter this time but filled with the weight of classified procedures being activated. "Shadow 7, stand by for identity verification." The next few minutes consisted of a series of authentication protocols that tested knowledge only the real Shadow 7 would possess. Details about operations that had never been officially acknowledged, code phrases that existed in no written document, and personal information that had been deliberately obscured in all official records. "Identity confirmed," Control finally said. "Shadow 7, what is your current operational status?" "I'm serving undercover as Petty Officer 3rd Class Audrey Smith, currently assigned to maintenance duties at Norfolk Naval Station. My cover has been compromised following analysis of cyber warfare intrusions aboard the USS Franklin." "Understood. Stand by for command authority." The line went silent again, but Audrey knew that somewhere in the Pentagon, secure phones were ringing and classified files were being opened for the first time in years. The Ghost unit had been disbanded, but the infrastructure to support its former operatives remained intact, waiting for situations exactly like this one. When the voice returned, it belonged to someone different, someone whose authority was unmistakable even through the encrypted connection. "Shadow 7, this is Admiral Patricia Kane, Director of Naval Intelligence. I've been briefed on your situation. Are you currently in a secure location?" "Yes, ma'am. I'm aboard the USS Franklin with Admiral Hayes standing by." "Admiral Hayes is cleared for this conversation. Put her on the line." Audrey stepped outside the communication center and found Admiral Hayes waiting with the patient intensity of someone accustomed to classified emergencies. "Admiral, Director Kane wants to speak with you directly." Hayes entered the communication center and took the handset. "Director Kane, this is Admiral Hayes." Rebecca, I'm going to read you into an operation that's been dormant for 8 years. The sailor you know as Audrey Smith is actually Lieutenant Commander Diana Reeves, former commanding officer of Ghost Unit Team 7. Admiral Hayes felt her breath catch. She had suspected former Ghost Unit, but a team commander represented something far more significant than she had imagined. Director, what exactly was Ghost Unit Team 7? Deep cover cyber warfare specialists. They were embedded throughout the fleet to identify and counter sophisticated electronic attacks against naval assets. Team 7 was responsible for preventing at least 12 major security breaches before the unit was officially disbanded. Why was it disbanded? Kane's voice carried the weight of difficult decisions made under extreme pressure. Team 7 uncovered evidence of a coordinated cyber warfare campaign targeting U.S. naval assets. The evidence implicated individuals with high-level security clearances, but before they could complete their investigation, the team was compromised. 3 of the 5 team members were killed in what appeared to be training accidents. Commander Reeves and 1 other operative were given new identities and embedded in deep cover positions to protect them from further attacks. Hayes absorbed this information with growing alarm. Director, if Commander Reeves has identified similar cyber warfare techniques aboard the Franklin, does that mean the original threat is still active? That's exactly what it means. Rebecca, I need you to understand something. The people who killed 3 Ghost Unit operatives 8 years ago are still out there, and they've just been handed a gift. Commander Reeves's analysis of the Franklin systems will inevitably lead back to her real identity. Admiral Hayes felt the pieces of a complex puzzle finally clicking into place. The court-martial 6 months ago, was that connected? We believe so. Someone has been systematically targeting former Ghost Unit personnel, using their current cover identities to manufacture legal troubles that would strip them of security clearances and access to sensitive systems. Hayes looked through the hatch toward the spot where Audrey Diana was waiting with Chief Washington. Director, what are my orders? Immediate extraction and relocation of Commander Reeves to a secure facility. We also need a complete analysis of the cyber warfare attack she identified. If the same group is still active, they may have compromised additional fleet assets. Understood. How do you want to handle the personnel who have been exposed to this information? Kane's voice turned grim. Chief Washington and Lieutenant Commander Mitchell will need to be debriefed and sworn to secrecy. But Rebecca, there's something else. Our intelligence suggests that the hostile operatives responsible for the original Ghost Unit compromises have penetrated Norfolk Naval Station. Commander Reeves may be in immediate physical danger. Admiral Hayes felt her pulse quicken. What kind of danger? The kind that results in training accidents and mechanical failures that kill people, Kane replied. Rebecca, I'm authorizing you to take whatever measures necessary to protect Commander Reeves until we can arrange secure extraction. How long until extraction? Minimum 12 hours, maximum 24. Can you keep her safe that long? Hayes considered the resources available to her and the potential threats they might face. Director, I'll need authorization to brief additional personnel and implement security protocols. Granted, you have full operational authority for this situation. But Rebecca, the fewer people who know the truth, the better. Whoever compromised Ghost Unit 8 years ago is still active, and they've demonstrated they're willing to kill to protect their operation. As Admiral Hayes concluded her conversation with Director Kane, she realized that what had begun as a routine maintenance issue had escalated into a matter of national security involving cyber warfare, deep cover operatives, and a hostile intelligence network that had been operating undetected for nearly a decade. Sights on, she stepped out of the communications center to find Audrey Diana waiting with the patient alertness of someone accustomed to sudden changes in operational status. Commander Reeves, Hayes said quietly, using her real rank for the first time. Diana's expression didn't change, but something in her eyes acknowledged the shift. Yes, ma'am. Your cover has been officially blown and you're in immediate danger. We're implementing security protocols until extraction can be arranged. Chief Washington looked confused. Admiral, did you just call Smith Commander? Hayes turned to Washington with the grave expression of someone about to share classified information. Chief, what I'm about to tell you is classified at the highest levels of government. The woman you know as Petty Officer Smith is actually Lieutenant Commander Diana Reeves, a deep-cover naval intelligence operative. Washington stared at Diana with dawning recognition. That explains everything. The technical knowledge, the way she moved around equipment, the way she analyzed that cyber attack. She's not maintenance personnel. No, Chief. She's one of the most highly trained cyber warfare specialists in the Navy, and someone wants her dead. Lieutenant Commander Mitchell, who had been monitoring communications from the bridge, appeared at the top of the ladder leading to the communications center. Admiral, we have a problem. Norfolk Base Security is reporting that 2 individuals matching the description of the NCIS agents who were here earlier have been found dead in their vehicle approximately 3 miles from the base. Admiral Hayes felt ice forming in her stomach. Estimated time of death? Preliminary assessment suggests within the last hour. Diana stepped forward, her voice calm but urgent. Admiral, if hostile operatives are willing to kill federal agents to protect their operation, they won't hesitate to target anyone else who's been exposed to this information. Agreed, Hayes turned to Mitchell. XO, I'm implementing THREATCON Delta for this vessel. All personnel are to remain aboard until further notice. No one gets on or off this ship without my personal authorization. Aye, Admiral. As the ship's crew began implementing enhanced security measures, Diana pulled Admiral Hayes aside. Ma'am, there's something else you need to know. The cyber attack I identified aboard the Franklin isn't just designed to disable defensive systems. It's designed to provide targeting information to hostile forces. Hayes felt her blood run cold. Are you saying someone is providing enemy forces with real-time intelligence about our naval operations? Yes, ma'am. And if they've compromised the Franklin, they've likely compromised other ships as well. We may be looking at the most serious breach of naval security in decades. As if to emphasize her point, the ship's communication system crackled to life with an urgent message from Norfolk Naval Operations. All ships in port, implement immediate security protocols. We have reports of suspicious activity near pier facilities. Admiral Hayes realized that what had begun as a simple court-martial had evolved into something far more dangerous. The ghost was emerging from the shadows, but so were the forces that had tried to bury her 8 years ago. The next few hours would determine whether Commander Diana Reeves survived long enough to complete the mission that had cost 3 of her teammates their lives. The USS Franklin transformed into a fortress within minutes of Admiral Hayes implementing THREATCON Delta. Sailors moved with practiced efficiency, securing hatches, manning defensive positions, and establishing overlapping fields of fire from the ship's weapons systems. But Diana knew that all the conventional security measures in the world wouldn't stop operatives sophisticated enough to assassinate federal agents in broad daylight. Admiral, she said, studying the ship's defensive configuration, we're thinking about this wrong. Hostile operatives won't try to board the ship. They'll find a way to eliminate the threat from a distance. Hayes paused in her review of security protocols. What kind of threat are you envisioning? Long-range sniper fire, improvised explosive devices on adjacent piers, even a coordinated cyber attack designed to cause catastrophic system failures. Diana gestured toward the ship's superstructure. This ship is designed to defend against missiles and aircraft, not against asymmetric threats from shore-based operatives. Chief Washington, who had been quietly absorbing the reality of his transformed maintenance worker, stepped forward. Commander, if these people have been operating undetected for 8 years, they must have significant resources and inside knowledge of naval operations. Exactly. Diana appreciated Washington's quick grasp of the situation. Which means they probably know our defensive capabilities better than we know their offensive ones. Lieutenant Commander Mitchell's voice crackled over the ship's communication system. Admiral Hayes to the bridge immediately. We have incoming priority traffic from NAVINT. Hayes and Diana made their way to the ship's bridge, where Mitchell was coordinating with Norfolk base operations while monitoring multiple communication channels simultaneously. The bridge crew worked with the heightened alertness of sailors who understood they might be facing combat operations within sight of their home port. Admiral, Mitchell reported, we've received intelligence indicating that the individuals responsible for the NCIS agents' deaths may be planning additional operations targeting naval personnel. Hayes accepted the classified communication tablet Mitchell offered. As she read, her expression grew increasingly grave. Commander Reeves, she said quietly, the intelligence community has identified at least 6 former Ghost Unit personnel who have died in suspicious circumstances over the past 2 years. Training accidents, vehicle malfunctions, apparent suicides, all involving individuals who had been given new identities after the unit was disbanded. Diana felt a familiar chill of professional recognition. Someone has been systematically hunting down former Ghost Unit operatives. The question is why now, after 8 years? Navant believes it's connected to recent changes in naval cybersecurity protocols, Hayes replied. The new systems are designed to detect exactly the kind of sophisticated intrusions that Ghost Unit was created to counter. Someone is eliminating the people most likely to recognize their attacks. Chief Washington, who had followed them to the bridge, studied the tactical display showing Norfolk Naval Station's layout. Admiral, if hostile operatives are already on base, they have multiple options for attacking this ship, but they also have escape routes that would allow them to disappear into civilian areas. Which is exactly why we're not waiting for them to come to us, Diana said with sudden decision. Admiral, I request permission to go ashore and identify the hostile operatives before they can mount an attack. Hayes stared at her, as if she had suggested single-handedly invading a foreign country. Commander, you're the primary target. Going ashore would be suicide. With respect, Admiral, staying aboard this ship turns the entire crew into potential casualties. These operatives have demonstrated they're willing to kill federal agents to protect their operation. They won't hesitate to target a naval vessel if that's what it takes to eliminate me. Lieutenant Commander Mitchell looked up from her communications console. Admiral, we're receiving reports of suspicious individuals conducting surveillance of pier facilities. Base security is investigating, but they're operating under normal protocols, not counterintelligence procedures. Diana turned to Hayes with the intensity of someone who had spent 8 years preparing for this moment. Ma'am, the base security personnel don't know what they're looking for. They're trained to identify conventional threats, unauthorized personnel, suspicious packages, obvious weapons. They're not equipped to recognize professional intelligence operatives. And you are? Yes, ma'am, it's what I was trained for. Hayes considered the tactical situation with the methodical analysis that had earned her flag rank. Diana was right about the crew's vulnerability, but sending her ashore seemed like handing the enemy exactly what they wanted. Commander, if you go ashore, what's your operational plan? Identify the hostile operatives, determine their capabilities and intentions, and either neutralize them or provide intelligence that allows friendly forces to do so. Diana's response carried the confidence of someone who had executed similar operations before. I know how these people think, how they operate, how they select targets and plan attacks. Chief Washington cleared his throat diplomatically. Begging the Admiral's pardon, but Commander Reeves won't be going alone. Hayes and Diana both turned to stare at him. Chief, this isn't a maintenance operation, Hayes said. No, ma'am, but with respect, I've been working around this base for 15 years. I know every building, every back entrance, every security camera, and every blind spot. More importantly, I know which personnel belong here and which ones don't. Diana studied Washington's weathered face with new appreciation. Chief, this is extremely dangerous. These aren't criminal suspects. They're trained killers who won't hesitate to eliminate anyone who threatens their operation. Commander, I spent 2 tours in Afghanistan before I became a maintenance chief. I'm not afraid of dangerous people. Washington's voice carried the quiet conviction of someone who had faced combat before. Besides, you'll need someone who can provide local knowledge and cover for action. Admiral Hayes found herself facing a decision that would have been unthinkable 12 hours earlier, authorizing a deep cover intelligence operative and a maintenance chief to conduct counterintelligence operations against hostile agents on American soil. This is insane, she said finally. Yes, ma'am, Diana agreed, but it's the kind of insane that might actually work. Hostile operatives will be watching for military response patterns, organized security sweeps, coordinated law enforcement operations, obvious tactical deployments. They won't be expecting a maintenance chief and a disgraced sailor to come hunting them. Lieutenant Commander Mitchell approached with another communication update. Admiral, Norfolk Base Operations reports that the suspicious individuals appear to be conducting systematic surveillance of pier facilities, focusing on ships with advanced electronic warfare capabilities. How many ships? Hayes asked. 6 vessels currently in port have the kind of sophisticated defensive systems that would be attractive targets for cyber warfare operations, Mitchell replied. If the same intrusion techniques have been used against multiple ships, we could be looking at a coordinated attack designed to disable significant portions of the fleet. Diana felt pieces of a complex puzzle falling into place. Admiral, this isn't just about eliminating former Ghost Unit personnel. Someone is preparing for a major operation against naval assets, and they need to eliminate anyone capable of detecting their cyber warfare preparations. Hayes made her decision with the sudden clarity that came from recognizing an unacceptable risk. Commander Reeves. Chief Washington, you have authorization to conduct reconnaissance operations to identify hostile operatives. You are not, repeat, not, authorized to engage targets without specific approval. Understood, Admiral. Chief, you're temporarily assigned to intelligence operations under Commander Reeves's direct authority. Whatever she tells you about operational security, you follow without question. Washington nodded gravely. Aye, Admiral. As Diana and Washington prepared to disembark, Hayes pulled Diana aside for a final word. Commander, 8 years ago, someone killed 3 of your teammates to stop Ghost Unit from exposing this operation. Now they're systematically eliminating the survivors. What makes you think you can succeed where your entire team failed? Diana met the Admiral's gaze with steady determination. Because 8 years ago, we were trying to gather evidence and work within the system. This time, I'm not interested in evidence or legal proceedings. I just want to stop them. And if that requires lethal force, then that's what I'll use. Admiral Hayes watched as Diana and Chief Washington disappeared into the maze of pier facilities surrounding Norfolk Naval Station. In her 30-year career, she had authorized countless operations, but never one that felt more like sending people to their deaths. On her orders, the USS Franklin maintained full defensive readiness while base security conducted what appeared to be routine patrols. But somewhere in the sprawling complex of buildings and warehouses that surrounded the world's largest naval base, a deadly game of cat and mouse was about to begin. The hunter had become the hunted, but Diana Reeves was no longer the frightened operative who had gone into hiding 8 years ago. She was a ghost, emerging from the shadows with 8 years of suppressed rage and the skills to back it up. The real war was about to begin. The maintenance tunnel beneath Pier 9 reeked of diesel fuel and decades of accumulated salt spray, but it provided exactly what Diana and Chief Washington needed: invisibility. They moved through the labyrinthine network of service passages that connected Norfolk's pier facilities, Washington leading with the confidence of someone who had navigated these tunnels countless times, Diana following with the silent precision of a trained operative. Maintenance access to Building 447 coming up, Washington whispered, consulting a hand-drawn map he'd sketched from memory. That's where base security spotted the surveillance team. Diana studied the tactical situation through the lens of 8 years' experience reading hostile operations. Chief, if these operatives are conducting visual reconnaissance of pier facilities, they're not just gathering intelligence. They're timing security patterns and identifying vulnerabilities for a specific operation. They emerged from the tunnel into a storage facility filled with spare parts for the massive cranes that loaded and unloaded naval vessels. Washington led them through rows of hydraulic components and electrical equipment toward a service ladder that accessed the building's upper floors. Commander, Washington said as they climbed, I've been thinking about what you said regarding cyber attacks on multiple ships. If someone has compromised 6 vessels with advanced defensive systems, what kind of operation would require that level of preparation? Diana paused on the ladder, struck by the tactical implications of Washington's question. Something big enough to justify 8 years of planning and the systematic elimination of anyone capable of detecting it. They reached the 4th floor of Building 447, where Washington led Diana to a maintenance access point that provided visual surveillance of the pier facilities without exposing them to observation from ground level. Through a carefully positioned mirror system that maintenance personnel used to monitor crane operations, they could observe the entire waterfront area. There, Washington said softly, pointing toward a group of 3 individuals positioned near the entrance to Pier 12. Those aren't base personnel. Diana studied the surveillance team through compact binoculars. 2 men and 1 woman, all dressed in civilian clothing that was just slightly too neat for dockyard work. They moved with the subtle coordination of people accustomed to working together, and their positioning provided overlapping coverage of the pier approaches. Professional surveillance, she confirmed, and they're not just watching. They're waiting for something specific. As if summoned by her words, a fourth individual approached the surveillance team from the direction of the base administration buildings. Even from a distance, Diana recognized the purposeful stride of someone delivering operational updates. "Chief, do you have access to base communication systems from here?" Washington nodded toward a maintenance communication panel. "I can tap into base security frequencies, but it's not encrypted." "That's fine. I need to know what official security operations are currently active." While Washington worked on accessing the communication system, Diana continued observing the hostile surveillance team. Their leader, a tall man with prematurely gray hair, was studying what appeared to be a tablet computer, while the others maintained watch positions. "Commander," Washington said quietly, "base security is reporting normal patrol patterns. No special operations, no enhanced surveillance, no indication they're aware of hostile operatives." Diana felt the familiar chill of recognition that came from seeing an operation unfold exactly as enemy planners intended. They're waiting for something specific to happen, either a scheduled event or a signal from inside sources. Inside sources? Someone with access to operational schedules, security protocols, maybe even communication systems. Diana lowered her binoculars as the implications became clear. "Chief, how many people knew about my real identity before Admiral Hayes revealed it?" Washington considered carefully. The Admiral, Director Kane, Lieutenant Commander Mitchell, myself, and whoever Director Kane briefed at NAVINT. "And how many people knew about the cyber warfare analysis I conducted aboard the Franklin?" "The same group, plus the ship's technical personnel who would have been involved in implementing countermeasures." Diana felt pieces of a deadly puzzle clicking into place. Someone with access to classified information is providing operational intelligence to hostile forces. They're not just hunting former Ghost Unit personnel. They're using inside information to coordinate attacks. Before Washington could respond, the maintenance communication system crackled with an urgent transmission. "Base security to all units, we have reports of unauthorized personnel in restricted pier areas. All patrols increase alertness and report suspicious activity immediately." Through their observation position, Diana watched the hostile surveillance team react to the security alert with calm professionalism. Instead of withdrawing, they adjusted their positions to account for increased security patrols. They were expecting this, Diana realized. Someone told them base security would increase patrols at this time. Washington studied the tactical display. "Commander, if they have inside information about security operations, they probably know about our reconnaissance mission." Diana was already moving toward the service ladder, which means we've walked into a trap. "Chief, we need to relocate immediately." They descended through the building's maintenance levels with controlled urgency, Washington leading them through a different route than they had used to enter. But as they reached the tunnel access point, Diana's trained instincts detected something wrong. "Stop," she whispered, raising her hand. Washington froze, recognizing the tone of someone who had survived by trusting professional paranoia. Diana studied the tunnel entrance, noting subtle changes that most people would have missed. A maintenance panel that was slightly ajar, despite Washington's habit of securing all access points. Dust patterns on the floor that suggested recent foot traffic. Most telling, the faint odor of gun oil that didn't belong in a maintenance tunnel. "They found our entry point," she said quietly. "Someone's waiting in the tunnel." Washington pulled out his cell phone and showed Diana a text message that had arrived while they were observing the surveillance team. "Maintenance Chief Washington, report to Building 447 immediately for emergency equipment inspection. Signed, Base Operations." "I never received official orders to come here," Washington said. "Someone used my name and position to justify our presence in this building." Diana realized they were facing a sophisticated operation that had anticipated their movements and prepared countermeasures. "Chief, how many other ways out of this building?" "3 service exits, plus the main entrance. But if they know we're here, they'll have all exits covered." "Not all exits," Diana said, studying the building's layout with the tactical awareness of someone trained in escape and evasion. "What about roof access?" Washington's weathered face showed grudging admiration. "Maintenance ladder to the roof. From there we could access the crane service platform and move to adjacent buildings." "Lead the way." They climbed 6 floors through the building's maintenance infrastructure, emerging onto a roof that provided a panoramic view of Norfolk Naval Station. From this vantage point, Diana could see the scope of the hostile operation more clearly. "Chief, look at the pattern," she said, pointing to various positions around the base. "They're not just conducting surveillance. They're establishing a perimeter. Someone is planning a coordinated operation against multiple targets." Washington followed her gaze and saw what she meant. Small teams positioned at strategic points throughout the base, all maintaining communication through what appeared to be civilian cell phones but with the coordination of military operations. "How many people are we looking at?" "At least 12 operatives that I can identify, probably more that are hidden from view." Diana studied the tactical situation with growing alarm. This isn't a targeted assassination. It's a full-scale infiltration. Before Washington could respond, Diana's phone buzzed with an encrypted message. "Shadow 7, this is Control. Abort mission immediately and return to secure location. We have intelligence indicating imminent attack on your position." Diana showed the message to Washington. "Too late for that, Chief. If we're surrounded, our best option is to go forward, not back." "Forward to where?" Diana pointed toward the cluster of buildings surrounding the base's main communication facility. "If they're planning a coordinated attack on naval assets, they'll need to compromise base communications to prevent coordination of defensive measures. That's where they're ultimately headed." Washington studied the distance they would need to cover using crane platforms and building-to-building access routes. "Commander, that's a half-mile journey through hostile territory." "Yes, it is." Diana checked her sidearm and began planning the route they would need to take. "But it's also the last place they'll expect us to go. Every instinct tells an operative to escape when surrounded. We're going to attack instead." As they prepared to begin their dangerous transit across Norfolk's industrial landscape, Diana felt the familiar surge of adrenaline that came from transitioning from hunted to hunter. For 8 years she had hidden in the shadows, suppressing her true capabilities to maintain her cover. Now the shadows were about to discover what happened when you cornered a ghost, with nothing left to lose. The real battle for Norfolk Naval Station was about to begin, and Diana Reeves was done running. The crane service platform swayed 30 feet above the Norfolk waterfront as Diana and Chief Washington made their precarious journey toward the base communications center. Below them, hostile operatives moved through the maze of pier facilities with the coordinated precision of a military operation, unaware that their primary targets were now stalking them from above. "Next building coming up," Washington whispered, pointing toward a maintenance bridge that connected 2 warehouse structures. "From there, we can access the communication facility through the utility tunnels." Diana paused their movement to observe the tactical situation below. What she saw confirmed her worst fears about the scope of the hostile operation. "Chief, they're not just positioning for surveillance anymore. Look at the equipment they're deploying." Washington followed her gaze and spotted operatives setting up what appeared to be portable communication jammers near critical infrastructure points. Others were installing devices on electrical junction boxes that controlled power to essential base systems. "They're preparing to isolate and disable the base's defensive capabilities," Diana realized. "This is the preliminary phase of a coordinated attack." Before Washington could respond, Diana's encrypted phone buzzed with an urgent message from Admiral Hayes. "Ghost unit protocols now active. You are authorized for direct action against hostile forces. Extraction impossible. Friendly forces cannot reach your position without compromising base security." Diana showed the message to Washington. "Chief, this just became a combat operation. Are you prepared for that?" Washington's weathered face showed the grim determination of someone who had faced enemy fire before. "Commander, I didn't spend 2 tours in Afghanistan to let foreign operatives attack my home base. What do you need me to do?" Diana studied the communication facility they needed to reach, a heavily secured building that housed the equipment controlling all base communications, including emergency systems that would coordinate defensive measures during an attack. "The communication center is their ultimate target," she said. "If they can compromise base communications during their main assault, they can prevent coordination between ships, aircraft, and ground forces. We need to get there first and establish defensive positions." They completed their traverse across the crane platforms and descended into the utility tunnel system that Washington knew better than anyone on base. Moving through the underground network with silent efficiency, they approached the communication facility from beneath. "Commander," Washington said as they climbed toward the surface, "I've been thinking about the inside source providing intelligence to hostile operatives." Someone with access to classified information about your identity, the Franklin systems, and base security protocols. What's your assessment? It has to be someone at the command level, not just clearance, authority to access multiple classified systems without triggering security reviews. Diana felt the cold recognition of betrayal at the highest levels. Someone who knew about Ghost Unit operations 8 years ago and has been systematically eliminating survivors ever since. They emerged from the tunnel system into the basement of the communication facility, where the building's massive power and cooling systems hummed with mechanical efficiency. Diana immediately noticed something wrong. "Chief, this facility should have multiple security personnel on duty. Where is everyone?" Washington checked his watch. Shift change happened 20 minutes ago, but there should still be overlap coverage. Diana drew her sidearm and motioned for Washington to follow her toward the main communications center. As they climbed the service stairs, she heard the subtle sound that every combat veteran learns to recognize, the whisper of suppressed gunfire from the floors above. "They're already here," she whispered. Moving with the deadly precision of someone trained for close-quarters combat, Diana ascended toward the communications center. What she found there would have shocked anyone except a former Ghost Unit operative who had spent 8 years expecting betrayal. The communications center's security personnel lay dead at their posts, killed with the professional efficiency of trained assassins. The facility's primary communications systems had been systematically compromised, with sophisticated electronic warfare devices installed to intercept and redirect base communications. But the most shocking discovery was the identity of the person coordinating the operation. Captain James Rodriguez, the same officer who had presided over Diana's court-martial, stood before the main communication console, downloading classified files while directing hostile operatives through a secure headset. "Captain Rodriguez," Diana said, her weapon trained on the man who had destroyed her career to protect his own operation. Rodriguez turned slowly, his expression showing no surprise at her appearance. "Commander Diana Reeves, I was wondering when you would surface. 8 years is a long time to hide in maintenance duties. Long enough to watch you systematically murder my teammates." "Your teammates died because they discovered something that threatened national security," Rodriguez replied calmly. "The Ghost Unit stumbled onto an operation that was protecting American interests through methods that officially couldn't be acknowledged." Washington kept his weapon trained on 2 hostile operatives while Diana faced Rodriguez. "Commander, this man is confessing to treason." "Not treason, Chief, necessity." Rodriguez gestured toward the communication equipment around them. "For 8 years, I've been providing selective intelligence to foreign operatives who were helping us identify threats to American naval assets. The information we gathered prevented at least 6 major attacks on U.S. facilities." Diana felt the pieces of a complex deception falling into place. "You were running a double-agent operation using Ghost Unit intelligence as bait. But something went wrong. Your team got too close to identifying the true nature of the operation. They were going to expose assets who were providing critical intelligence about hostile cyber warfare capabilities. So you had them killed and tried to eliminate the survivors." Rodriguez nodded without emotion. "The operation was too important to allow personal considerations to compromise it. But now the situation has changed." Before Diana could ask what he meant, the building's emergency lighting activated, and Admiral Hayes' voice echoed through the base communication system. "All hands, this is Admiral Hayes. Norfolk Naval Station is under attack by hostile forces. Implement THREATCON Delta immediately. This is not a drill." Through the communication center's windows, Diana could see muzzle flashes erupting throughout the base as hostile operatives began their coordinated assault on critical infrastructure. The operation Rodriguez had been protecting had finally revealed its true purpose. Not intelligence gathering, but preparation for a full-scale attack on America's largest naval base. "Chief," Diana said without taking her eyes off Rodriguez, "activate the emergency communication protocols. Get word to every ship in port that their defensive systems have been compromised." Washington moved to the communication console while Diana kept Rodriguez covered. But as he began transmitting warnings to the fleet, Rodriguez spoke again. "Commander, you don't understand. The attack you're witnessing isn't the operation I've been supporting. This is what I've been trying to prevent." "Explain." "The foreign operatives I was working with have gone rogue. They were supposed to provide intelligence about hostile cyber warfare capabilities, But they've been using the information I provided to plan this attack instead. Diana realized she was facing a betrayal within a betrayal. Rodriguez had been manipulated by the same operatives he thought he was manipulating. How many ships have been compromised? All of them. Every vessel in port has cyber warfare intrusions designed to disable defensive systems when activated remotely. The magnitude of the disaster became clear. If hostile operatives could disable the defensive systems of the entire Atlantic fleet while it was concentrated at Norfolk, they could destroy billions of dollars in naval assets and kill thousands of personnel. Chief, how many ships can you warn before the communication system is completely compromised? Washington worked frantically at the console. I've reached the Franklin and 4 other vessels. But the jamming is getting stronger. I'm losing contact with the rest of the fleet. Diana made a decision that would have been unthinkable under normal circumstances. Rodriguez, if you want to prevent the disaster you helped create, you're going to help us stop it. How? You know the activation codes for the cyber warfare intrusions. Can they be disabled remotely? Rodriguez hesitated, realizing that cooperation would mean confessing to 8 years of treasonous activity. But as explosions erupted across the base and hostile operatives advanced on critical facilities, he understood that the alternative was catastrophic. Yes, but only from the base's primary communication hub, and only if we can establish secure connections to all compromised vessels simultaneously. Diana looked at Washington, who nodded grimly. Commander, I can establish the connections, but we'll need to defend this facility against hostile forces who know exactly where we are. Then that's what we'll do. As hostile operatives began their assault on the communication facility, Diana realized that the Ghost Unit's final mission was about to begin. 8 years of hiding, 8 years of suppressed capabilities, 8 years of waiting for vindication, all leading to this moment. Outside, the battle for Norfolk Naval Station raged with increasing intensity. But inside the communication center, a disgraced maintenance worker, a career Navy chief, and a treasonous captain began the desperate fight to save the Atlantic Fleet from the most sophisticated cyber warfare attack in naval history. The Ghost had finally emerged from the shadows, and she was bringing hell with her. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hits the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.